Are we watching the IRS come to a slow end? And this is where I'm going with this. I think we are. There's a lot going on in the world at the moment, lots of conflict going on, and mainly the headlines are talking up the whole change of the barrel of oil, what the price is on Brent oil, etc. I see those fluctuations in the market all the time, so I kind of go, I don't really make that big a deal about it, and that's because coming from more of a trader perspective on this whole situation where we see major swings on different assets at different times. But yes, it may cause some places to be higher in terms of their rates as far as filling up the tank is concerned and what that will cost for people. I want to look at some stories that are kind of flying under the radar, though, with all this distraction that's going on as far as geopolitical conflicts are concerned. What was interesting is that you could argue that the IRS is starting to be a little bit repurposed in the US. Have a look at this division that kind of kicks it off for us here at this press conference.
And we also have the IRS here that's helping us track how these violent protesters are funded, what NGOs out there, what unions, what other individuals may be funding these violent perpetuators that are in these protests that take people who may be wanting to come and be peaceful, but instead turn these into very violent activities that go after law enforcement. That's just simply not acceptable.
That the IRS is actually looking into investigating where the funds are going towards the protesters. Now, what they've noticed with the big LA riots is that they're very well organized to the point where professional gear was going in, helmets and other things that were tools used for protesting in a more professional manner. And, when you start noticing patterns like in other protests we've seen, the same tent colors from city to city going up. Somebody's done a bulk order supply and getting it through those routes. And so she's highlighting that the IRS is actually going to look into these sort of things, where these funds are going. And people are going, awesome. Now the IRS is actually looking at some real investigation as opposed to what the honest Joes are doing in terms of trying to, feed a family, make a living and feed their family. So it's quite ironic, this. Meanwhile, you've got ex-Congressman Billy Long confirming as commissioner of the IRS, an agency he once sought to abolish. So this is really an interesting sort of turn of events as far as big taxation is concerned. Now, why am I making this a big deal? Well, you've got to understand here that when you see these kind of changes going on, people start going, well, why isn't this going on in my country? And that's the whole point here, is looking at what is really going on underneath the surface of all these stories. Now, ex-Congressman Billy Long has been put in there. He was confirmed on the Thursday, and he is what they're calling the beleaguered agency. AP News is saying this. The Senate confirmed him on a 53-44 vote, despite the Democrats' concern about he's a Republican. His past work for a firm that pitched a fraud-ridden coronavirus pandemic-era tax break about campaign contributions he's received after President Donald Trump nominated him to serve as the IRS commissioner. He was in Congress from 2011 to 2023, and he actually sponsored legislation to get rid of the IRS, the agency he is now tasked with leading. So he was getting rid of his future employer, or trying to get rid of his future employer. He has no background in tax administration. And, the IRS is facing massive changes. So not only are you seeing them looking into certain investigations as far as protesting is concerned, but we're talking including layoffs, voluntary retirements of tens of thousands of workers, and accusations that Elon Musk's Doge department mishandled sensitive taxpayer data. They're facing that as well. The unions, the advocacy organizations have sued to block Doge's access to that information. As you got to know, of course, the IRS holds a lot of sensitive data on Americans, and it's like the equivalent of the Australian Taxation Office. And this is really, really fascinating at a time when, the complete system is just an overhaul as far as America is concerned.
One thing I've noticed quite largely what's going on in America at the moment, and I've got a very special interest in this because we are actually planning to relocate there. the interdepartment cooperation that's happening since Trump's taken office is insane. Like, it's amazing to see all the different departments actually working together to work for the American people instead of the other way around. A prime example of this, and I actually think it's quite a good idea to use someone who wants to destroy something to put him in charge of it. And here's the reason why. It's not that he didn't like the idea or the concept of the IRS. It's just that it wasn't used for what it was meant to be used for. So if he's prepared enough to put his name to a bill to say, we got to abolish the IRS because it's not doing what it's meant to do, it generally means they've got ideas on how to fix that. Now, he's been in Parliament for a very, very long time. He's been an active member of Parliament as well. You got to remember, there's difference between an active member of Parliament and someone who's like Joe Biden, who's just been there for 47 years, not really doing anything. He's actually been active. He's been sponsoring bills, putting things together, talking to the constituents. I actually quite like him as a leader of the people. I think he's actually a really good decision to have as the IRS because he's coming in with a fresh set of eyes, which is a really critical set of eyes saying, right, this needs to be done better. So when you run a business, you don't need to be able to do every single aspect of the business. You still need to understand how they work together. But I think he's got more of a business mentality where the IRS has to be run as a business if it's going to operate properly.
Well, we know from an interview from a so-called whistleblower from the IRS through James O'Keefe's media group that they're using technology at the IRS that's dated from the 70s, like going back to MS-DOS type software.
Oh, I love DOS.
And some people like that concept, but for them to just generate a letter to send to someone, it takes a long time for that process to go on. What you're also seeing is, Elon was saying we need to upgrade their computer systems, but I think, are we watching the IRS come to a slow end? And this is where I'm going with this. I think we are. I think that you've got politicians in the United States who are educating the masses how they were better off without an income tax back in the 1800s. And that we want to do that and replace that with the External Revenue Service. So I'm wondering if we're going for a flip, that this guy has been put in there to bring this organization to an end, the IRS, and that will be replaced by the ERS, funded by, of course, the External Revenue Service by Trump's tariffs that he's doing internationally. For this to occur is a massive, massive turnaround as far as finance is concerned, the way it's conducted. And why am I saying this? Because a lot of politicians are looking around the world at this model and the changes that the United States is making right now and going, well, why aren't we doing this in our own countries? For goodness sake, you've got politicians who are educating people on how we need to get rid of the taxation system in the US. That's what's going on. The largest economy of the world is doing this. It's like a dream come true for many people, right? And so how long does it take before other nations start getting ideas, other people rising up and going, I want to put my hand up for public service and make these reforms in my country as well?
Well, there's countries that are already doing it where they don't have an income tax. Saudi Arabia comes to mind straight away. Panama does have an income tax, but it's extremely low. They do more of a consumption-based tax than what's instead of an income tax. Corporation tax is minuscule in Panama. Another tax haven, but they're making half decent money. Their debt to income ratio is actually relatively quite good, but they do have the Panama Canal, so they've got a really good source of income there. But Saudi Arabia, a lot of the Arab countries don't actually have an income tax. Turkey is another one. So I can't see why other countries can't implement it, especially if you're exporting natural resources. Like Australia, vast amount of our resources are exported. Most of our income actually comes from exports. So why can't we start taxing resources properly when they get sent offshore and reduce our income tax for the everyday person? So I have to give a shout out to the Aussie punter, Punter's Politics. He's really good at bringing issues about that one as well. So I've just done a quick Google search. According to the IRS website, in the financial year ending in 2024, they actually raised $5.1 trillion for the year. So that's what the everyday American people paid to the IRS. So if you're having a look at these tariffs that Trump's put on, he was saying something like last month it brought in over $66 billion worth of tariffs alone. And so these tariffs the exports have been all over the shop. So there is definitely income coming in from the tariffs. If you start taxing corporations at a half decent rate, so they want to be there paying their corporations tax instead of the income tax, I think it's very, very viable. I think this is a very viable option, and I think it's going to be a huge win for the American people.
And coupled with that, Travis, you've got situations where you've got the investment going into the United States as well. So to avoid those tariffs, companies are being encouraged to onshore their manufacturing in the US. And you've also got foreign players. You've got Nippon Steel going in with US Steel and buying the company, but allowing the majority of the ownership to happen on US ownership and staying on US soil to actually do the work. You've also got, Trump's recent trip to the Middle East, and that was like $6 trillion worth of investment going into the United States, not just in Boeing and airplanes, but defense as well, not to mention artificial intelligence. That was where the big spend is. These Saudi Arabian countries, and the Arabian countries, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and more, they want access to AI. They want to be at the forefront of that. And I can understand why they want to start diversifying now. As far as their investments are concerned, they have been living on oil and done very well for decades on that. But, you reach a point in wealth where you go, okay, maybe I need to diversify because the world is changing. And I suspect a lot of that has been going on in their minds. So this is big. Plus, they've got ambitious projects to set up major cities on the Persian Gulf there, where, they are 6 hours from all major capital cities in the world. So it's a very strategic point, particularly when you look at where Saudi Arabia is placed there with the Suez Canal. It's massive. So, yeah, this is major stuff that's going on. Saudi Arabia wanting to position itself, I believe, as a big market world leader in the decades to come.
So the other thing a lot of people also have to take into account with these investments coming into America, that's continual inflow. I think the trip to the Middle East that Trump did was nearly $7 trillion worth of investments alone. The amount of yearly revenue that's going to create is astronomical. Because don't forget, you've got the people doing the jobs. You've got all the resources that have to come in, like manufacturing the steel, the concrete, and all the stuff that they don't actually manufacture onshore. And then you're hiring all the people after the construction to run these businesses as well. So the flow-on effect from those investments is not just like, $5-6 billion up front. That's year after year after year after year, continual revenue coming in. So it's a phenomenal move by Trump. He's done really, really well in that regards. And regardless of what they say, it's a great move.
And what he's done right is he's hit it hard quickly and soon. He's got 4 years to prove that this will work. Now, 4 years, you'd suspect that the first 12 months, 6 to 12 months, are going to be basically getting that legislation through Congress and making it so these things can happen. I mean, he's just had a big win in the federal courts, appeals court, that you can do tariffs. He is allowed to raise revenue through tariffs internationally now. So he's like, great, I've got the endorsement of the Supreme Court on this. That's a big deal. And so he's got, and with any economy, it takes time for the trickle effect to come through, right? So if you make a change in the economy, you may not see the effects for 6 months at least before it starts having an effect on the actual finances of the country and everyday Americans. And so he's hit it hard. He's only got 4 years to prove it and prove his case, and then supposedly hand over the reins to someone else to do that. And I think, once you've done big moves like get rid of the IRS, if that's on his agenda, then it's very hard to reestablish it in the next term and years to come. They're going, well, this is so great. Why would we want to go back to it? It's also going to be very interesting to see the relationship he has with the Federal Reserve moving forward as well. That is, of course, the international bank that sets the rates for the United States. There is talk of the Fed going, and that's very early days. I came across this concept about 2 years ago. I only mentioned it to a very few people because I thought most people are going to think that's just wild, that's just crazy, it's just too out there. I would not be surprised that's going on, and it's interesting to watch the relationship between Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed, with, of course, the current president. So that'll be interesting to watch. Watch that space. So if you are eliminating the IRS, let's say the Fed goes as well. I mean, far out. We're talking about a whole different financial system, and you kind of see things setting up that way with the legislation that they're placing with cryptocurrency right now, and they're getting a lot of that legislation through Congress.
Yep. So I want to just give you a bit of a real world example of the fact that these tariffs are actually working. So one of the biggest, hardest hit industries was actually the semiconductor chip. So NVIDIA, prime example of a company that was absolutely hit hard, arguably the hardest out of all the companies with these tariffs. So their share prices, when the tariffs first started, they were hovering around the 140 mark. So they dropped all the way down to 94. I think that lowest was $95. So that's a huge loss. That's about a 40% loss. And that happened over the space of about a month when they started announcing these the tariffs. During last week, they hit a dollar. I think it was $1.45, $1.46. So they've actually bounced back above where they were prior to all the tariffs being put into place. And out close on Friday, because I'm quite heavily invested into NVIDIA, they were sitting around the 141, 142 mark. So to say that, oh, they've lost all this money, no, they haven't. They've just had to modify their business plan to match for the systems that they were in, which was the tariff system. They've done that. They've modified their chips so they can full import to China, which was a major player for them. And they've just had to modify their structures. And they've done that. They've done it extremely well. Their debt to asset ratio is still phenomenal. They're fine. And a lot of other semiconductor companies are in the same boat. Some haven't responded as well as NVIDIA, but all of them are climbing up really, really well. They're doing great. So I don't think these tariffs have actually hurt a lot of companies that bad.
I think, it's the unknown that people often overreact to, and Wall Street always overreacts to change and those sort of reforms. And it's either one or two ways, greed or fear. And those emotions are very extreme in the market. And so, it overprices or it always underprices what should happen. And you'll often see that smoothing out later on. Bear in mind that the Wall Street is incredibly manipulated as well by a lot of the big players in the game as well. So you can't always expect the price of a stock to be an accurate reflection of what it actually is worth. So, take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think long term, as Trump warned, there might be a little bit of short term pain in this, but over the long term, I think it's a big play that he's doing. I think it's the right play personally. Time's going to tell as far as how that smooths out. I think the United States has got some great years ahead of it.